Hi, very controversial here today. Enid Blyton. We're talking about her magazine annual. Specifically, I will be discussing her other works eventually on this channel as well. But the author herself, very controversial. I think one of the biggest criticisms is that her works lack literary merit. I don't know how I feel about this because I think Enid Blyton, for me at least, starting with Naughty and then moving on to all those, usual suspects, Famous Five, Secret Seven, Five Found Outers, Snobby and his dog Looney, and Jack and Lucy and Trent and Kiki and Bill Smuggs and Mike Arnold and Peggy and Nora and Prince Paul and those sort of books. I think that's how you start. That's where you start reading. Obviously I don't expect Latin and a lot of literary allusions when you start out with reading. So for me, Enid Blyton was an author. Her books were what paved the way into reading and, sort of opened up the world of books and literature to me. So I wouldn't say they're without literary merit from a personal viewpoint. However, to a lot of people, yeah, I'm afraid that Enid Blyton has fallen completely out of favour. But across the British Commonwealth, Enid Blyton remains not only a very recognised name, but you ask any kid who has the habit of reading books or who grew up reading books, if they've heard of Enid Blyton, they'll say yes. Long before Harry Potter, Enid Blyton was a household name, particularly, on the subcontinent. Of course, there's other criticism as well. Her books are dated. They feature a number of the racial stereotypes and sexist prejudices that did exist at the time. They were elitist. The kids featured were mostly middle class and upper middle class. But that isn't specific to Enid Blyton alone. There are a lot of other authors who were guilty of this as well. The lacking literary merit criticism is Enid Blyton's alone. And when you write more than 800 works, obviously, they're not exactly going to be the Iliad and the Odyssey, are they? So yeah, a very prolific writer, and she wrote for children. She wrote as somebody who was opening the world of books and reading to children, and that way, yeah, this is where you begin reading. So Enid Blyton's magazine, her own magazine, was the successor to the Sunny Stories magazine, which was edited by Enid Blyton for George Newnes. I will talk about the Sunny Stories magazine on this channel. I'm afraid that I can't find every copy of the magazine that I have in my stash, but I've got about at least a dozen of the Sunny Stories mags. So yeah, I'm trying to hunt them out. After I find the lot, I will be doing a video. However, in 1953, Enid Blyton stopped editing the Sunny Stories magazine and came out with her own Enid Blyton'S magazine. After the magazine came out, there was a bit of a demand for an annual, and accordingly, in 1954, 1 year after the Enid Blyton magazine began, the first Enid Blyton magazine annual came out. There were exactly 4 annuals: 1954, 55, 56 and 57. After that, the magazine continued until 1959, but the annual stopped coming out. The Enid Blyton magazine was a fortnightly with a number of serials, including Famous Five novels serialized through the mag. I have a problem with reading serialized novels. First of all, you've got to wait another whole 2 bloody weeks or 1 week or whatever until the next issue is in your hands to find out what happens next. I can't be asked to wait that long. Secondly, you've got to remember what happened in the previous issue. Thirdly, in order to store everything and make it a novel, you've also got to store the other pages in the magazine that you possibly don't like or don't want in order to have a full-length novel in your stash. So I think, for me at least, it's better to have a standalone novel than, serialized stories in magazines. So a whopping 162 issues of the magazine came out, compared to just 4 issues of the annual that accompanied it. The annual had 144 pages and came with attractive dust jackets. Unfortunately, I only managed to have 1 dust jacket of all 4 magazines in my collection, thanks to my mother, who collected these during her rash youth, childhood or whatever. I didn't know exactly when she bought these. As a child, she did rely a lot on her school's library. These were before she was even born. So yeah, she probably read them in her library and decided to own the lot. I don't know where she found them either. Anyway, I've got all 4 magazines. magazine annual. Sorry, I've got all 4 magazine annuals, and only one of them has a dust jacket, thanks to my mum's erratic buying. Now, let's talk about the first ever Enid Blyton magazine annual. This is what it looks like beneath that very attractive dust jacket. That's the second annual. There is a game, and I'll talk about the game in a second, inside on the inner front cover, as well as at the back. And then it says Enid Blyton's magazine annual #1. The contents page, all, richly illustrated. And then you have a letter from Green Hedges, that is Enid Blyton's home, from the lady herself. Now, this letter reveals a lot of the history as well as the sort of concept of this magazine annual. Dear boys and girls, probably not the right way to address people in this day and age. Here is our first annual. You asked for it months ago. You were determined to have one. You told me what you wanted to have in it, and here it is. So this was obviously issued on public demand by Enid Blyton's magazine readers. So she says that she couldn't put in what everybody asked for, because that way the annual would be as big as an encyclopedia. What she's done is going for what the majority wanted. The majority wanted a new Famous Five story. Obviously, I don't know. I've never seen the merit in it, the Famous Five. I don't like the Famous Five. I mean, I like George a bit, but and Julian's younger brother a bit. Apparently, you shouldn't say that word on YouTube. I hate the way the world has changed in some ways. The way word meanings have changed so badly. In some cases, but in most cases, yes, there needs to be a lot more change, in fact. But, in this case, Julian's younger brother, I don't know why on earth people had to associate his name with all sorts of things. So I quite like George, and I kind of like Julian's younger brother. But apart from that, I don't like the Famous Five. You read one of those adventures, you've read the lot. On the other hand, I quite like the Five Find Outers. I love Snubby. Snubby is probably my favourite Enid Blyton character. Right. The end. And then Secret 7 fans wanted a Secret 7 story as well. I'm not a fan of the Secret 7. I don't know. I mean, one story is just like everything else, And other people wanted Pink Whistle stories. I love Mr. Pink Whistle. I think Mr. Pink Whistle was one of my earliest known repeat fiction characters. My mum used to... I mean, I wasn't very healthy in my babyhood and toddlerhood. Before I could be vaccinated, thanks to an anti-vaxxer aunt, I developed measles, mumps and rubella. Thanks to an anti-vaxxer aunt who did not vaccinate her daughter, who was older than I, and they kept coming over, and I got all 3. So yeah, our first 5 or 6 years of my life, not very healthy. Mum used to read aloud to me. So yeah, I'm very familiar with Mr. Pink Whistle, and I loved his cat Sooty as well. And other people wanted Brer Rabbit, and the young ones wanted naughty stories as well. Yet others demanded puzzles and games, and apparently Enid Blyton says in her letter that the games were a bit difficult, but she did manage to put 1 game each in the front and side cover, as well as inside the back cover. And the last one, inside the back cover, is actually a Famous Five game. It needs 5 players: Julian, his younger brother, and George and Timmy, and whoever reaches first to catch the thief wins the game. She also discusses her clubs. There were Enid Blyton fans did come together and form certain clubs. The Famous Five Club, a very hard-working and charitable enterprise that raised money for a children's home. Now, Enid Blyton also says that this annual is not only going to boys and girls in Britain, it is also going to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, to Singapore, to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, yeah, names, places have changed, obviously, to Malay, to India, to every place where there are English-speaking children. This is basically across the British Commonwealth. Notice that she hasn't mentioned the Americas, possibly because, this was, Enid Blyton is more of a British Commonwealth household name. And I'm glad she mentioned India, because India is a place where Enid Blyton remains incredibly popular to this very day. My niece is currently reading Enid Blyton, and Enid Blyton says, so I'm going to take this chance of holding out a friendly hand to all those overseas readers of mine. They have our magazine, they love the same stories as we do, they belong to us and are our friends. I like to think of so many children in different corners of the world reading this letter. We do have fun together, don't we? What a truly enormous family I have. This is very inclusive of Enid Blyton. I must admit that I wasn't very happy when I came across Mr. Ho Ho Ha of Boncastle, India, in the Tally-Ho Cottage mystery. Fatty dresses up as an Indian student and calls himself Mr. Ho Ho Ha of Boncastle, India. When I was a child and reading that, it was funny. Ha ha, Ho Ho Ha, Boncastle, India. And then I grew up and I thought, Ho Ho Ha. She could have said, I don't know, Patel or Kumar or Singh, anything, you know, not Ho Ho Ha. That's ridiculous. But you know, after reading all this, more of her works, I realized that she was a lot more inclusive than I had hitherto thought. She liked all her readers around the world. I mean, if you read the letters from Enid Blyton to children, it is almost as though she's talking directly to you, reaches you. Particularly when I was a child, Enid Blyton was practically, you know, a great aunt or something. I mean, she died long before I was even thought of, before my parents even grew up. When my mum was reading her works aloud to me and her letters to the children in front of books out to me, I always thought, you know, she's this nan I never had or something. That is another area where Enid Blyton remains controversial, because apparently, although children around the world adored her, her own children and she apparently, hearsay, did not share the most close and, you know, warm relationship. Apparently, particularly her daughter Imogen. Her daughter Gillian later reconciled, I understand. I don't know much about this, and you know, I don't want to get into somebody's personal life like that. So after that letter, we have a story from the famous five. This one is new. There are also pictures that you can colour. Somebody has, you know, as you can see, coloured in some of it. I hope it wasn't my mum. That would be awkward. There is also the Nature Lovers Corner, which tells you about plants and flowers and trees and birds and butterflies that you find in the garden and around you. Brer Rabbit, as she promised. There are also comic strips. This is Josie Click and Bun. Activities and things to do, making, you know, a dining set for your doll. And Noddy has comic strips as well as standalone stories. And then there are mazes to, you know, solve, and riddles as well. The Nature Lovers Corner repeats itself within the same annual, so there's quite a bit of nature. Enid Blyton was huge on nature. She actually had a hedgehog in green hedges that lived with her in the garden, actually. Right, now, unfortunately, the first annual contains something incredibly problematic. She does talk about gollywogs, and there are 3 gollywogs who are her characters, and they're called Golly, Woggy, and I'm not going to tell you the name of the third. I'm going to hold my pen like that so you don't see the name of the third gollywog. Unfortunately, it is the N word, and it is pretty much unforgivable. Yes, so the first annual has something incredibly problematic. The other 2 do not have this problematic issue. You can see the picture there of the 3 gollywogs. A lot of the gollywogs featured in Enid Blyton's stories were not shown in a positive light, were racially stereotyped as well. Even the word shouldn't be there. Another character that is featured in these annuals is Mr. Meddle and his aunt Jemima, and Amelia Jane and the Sailor Doll. I like Amelia Jane. Mr. Twiddle is there in these annuals as well. A very, very forgetful and absent-minded bloke, Mr. Twiddle. And there are new standalone stories featuring very, very new characters who did not make it to any other works. Most of these are original stories. There are some reprints, very, very few. In the second annual, as you can see here, everything is new. Everything is new. And that dust jacket extends around the spine to the back and is very colourful, very attractive, very summery. Gorgeous dust jacket. I do wish my mum had waited to buy these until, you know, she could find ones with dust jackets. But, you know, these were collected before I was born. So I suppose she just, you know, whatever she could find from second-hand bookshops. And the second annual also contains games inside both covers. Apparently, the letters to Enid Blyton continued, as she says in her letter in the second magazine annual. She says that there are new stories, new puzzles and games, and more information about her clubs, and that this magazine annual also, just like the magazine, goes to the Falkland Islands, Singapore, Brazil, not part of the British Commonwealth. Very happy to see Brazil in here. Well done. Who is a Brazilian Enid Blyton reader or who was an Enid Blyton reader from Brazil, I'd love to know. Please do say hi in the comments below. To Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, to Trinidad, to the Fiji Islands, and to many parts of India. So all these characters appear in all the annuals. You know, Mr. Twiddle appears again, so does the Secret Seven, and you know, Amelia Jane and Mr. Medill. And the famous five, obviously, and Noddy, indeed. And the famous five short stories, George Hayes, too long, quite interesting. Mr. Pink Whistle. There are a lot of activities in here as well. How to set up an aquarium, very, very interesting. I'd love to make one. And then you have a lot of information about Enid Blyton's clubs. The Sunbeam Society was to raise funds for visually impaired children and came as a result of the magazine readers who chose the name for the club. The Famous Five Club obviously raised money to go to a small children's home that Enid Blyton helped run in Beaconsfield. All the children were below 5 years old, and the Famous Five Club helped, you know, fund the home. Upon joining, you'd receive a badge and get the magazine, the club's magazine, for a year or so. And the magazine contains prize puzzles and news per issue. The Sunbeam Club also had a magazine with puzzles and news and member activities, as did the Busy Bee Club. All of them had a joining fee, and the proceeds were what went to, you know, their respective funds. The Busy Bees obviously is for animal lovers, and it was actually the youth wing of the PDSA, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals. And Enid Blyton was Queen Bee. Then there was the Enid Blyton Magazine Club, which actually, you know, wasn't a particular, you know, fundraiser or a charity as such. It was more of a general club for everybody who read her magazine and, you know, wanted, you know, a place to discuss it, as it were, you know, safe place. And in order to join, you had to collect 6 coupons from 6 different magazines, Enid Blyton magazines, and send them in. And anybody who could recruit another 6 members could form a club group and become club leader. Very interesting. And then, you know, they had activities within each club group, and Enid Blyton gave them activity ideas. And it wasn't all, you know, fun and games and fundraising alone. It was also, you know, for instance, here she tells you about road safety signs, and you know, there was a bit of an educational element to them as well, apart from nature. And here she, in the 3rd magazine annual, she tells you how to make your own theatre and gives you ideas for plays. And here she tells you how to keep a tortoise for a pet. And here, finally, she tells you how to run a club, how to have a leader, a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, what you can do in the club, what kind of clubs you can form. Try not to let too many members join your club. It is much easier to run and to keep together if there are not too many members. What to do, what the club committee must do, and so on. And lastly, in each annual, you have the answers page with the answers to all those puzzles and riddles that were there. So I feel that these magazine annuals, just like Enid Blyton's magazine, were aimed at readers across all age groups, from the very young ones who could, you know, enjoy reading Josie, Click and Bun, to the older children who obviously could enjoy reading the Famous Five and, you know, conduct club activities. So as a result, there were the strips as well as, you know, regular print stories. And, you know, I like that she included every age group in these magazine annuals as well as her magazine. I also like that she remembered to tell us where this was sent out and, you know, gave a shout out to every child in all these places, you know, Brazil, Fiji, India, very inclusive there. However, as I told you, there are some very dated attitudes in some of the stories, as well as, unfortunately, racial stereotyping in the 1st magazine annual. It wasn't there in the other 2, but it was definitely there in the 1st one. I didn't notice any gollywogs in subsequent annuals. So I'll do another video on the Enid Blyton's magazine, as well as Sunny Stories magazine and the Sunny Stories annual another time. But, you know, this was, I wanted to get a start with Enid Blyton's videos because such a lot of material to cover. And, you know, this was the first set that came to hand. Have you come across the Enid Blyton magazine or the Enid Blyton magazine annual? Which was the earliest Enid Blyton work you came across? What are your overall thoughts on her works? Are you a fan? Are you not a fan? Have you read Enid Blyton? I'd like your thoughts on this. I mean, let's, keep it polite, but, let's have a discussion. So that's all from me for today. Thank you for watching this video. Please do give me a thumbs up. Please do hit the subscribe button. Please do ring the notifications bell, and I'll speak to you next Sunday.